email.
You did, great. Review it.
Because we've got
It's almost like THD-ish.
Tungy. Yeah, great. Ian, that's his last name. Contestant. Yeah, Ian. It's Ian?
It starts with an I.
Ian. All right, it's 5 p.m. on the nose. Welcome, everybody. We are here for a special study session, special meeting of the Federal City Council for March 21st, 2023. Would you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Recording in progress.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Welcome, everyone. We are here for a study session, City Center Access Environmental Study Findings and Update. We'll have a staff update from Desiree Winkler, our Deputy Public Works Director. Desiree?
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Let me get this going. Oops, back up. All right. So tonight, we wanted to give you an update on our City Center Access project, introduce the project for those who maybe weren't here during some of the development process of it. We're currently in preliminary design, and we've done quite a bit of environmental analysis, and we wanted to share those findings. We wanted to make sure that City Council understands the project and what the potential impacts are, and get any feedback you may have and answer any questions. So today we will go over project status. We will go over the preliminary design, summarize briefly public outreach efforts, share with you the environmental analysis and findings, talk about the next steps, and leave some time for questions and any feedback you have. So at this point, I'm going to tag team this. I'm going to turn it over to our city traffic engineer, Rick Perez.
Thank you and good evening. So, the preferred alternative consists of several different improvements, and I'll try putting them on the screen here. So one would be to extend 324th across I-5 to Weyerhaeuser Way from 23rd and going over I-5. And that's intended to not only provide a roadway, but also a shared use path for bicyclists and pedestrians. Also includes widening 324th to 5 lanes on the south side of the mall to Highway 99, and putting in additional left turn lanes for northbound, southbound 99 to turn on to 324th. We would be extending the footprint of the freeway by incorporating 324th into the interchange, and there'll be on and off ramps to both 320th and 324th, actually one on and off ramp in each direction that splits to serve those two. And that provides another way to get through city center area. We'd be installing roundabouts as part of the intersection improvements at 23rd, Weyerhaeuser Way, and the freeway ramp terminals. And this would also look at providing carpool lanes on 320th all the way from 99 out to Military Road. And also providing connections to those, we have the BPA trail here. It would eventually be extended all the way across, cut up the backside of DeVita, and then up 32nd for an eventual extension out towards Auburn. So project status. So back in 2017, we started engaging the community and evaluating options to ease congestion through the city center. And the city moved forward with a set of improvements that we're calling the preferred alternative, as I just described. So then As the design progressed, the city evaluated how this project affects the surrounding environment. And the project is currently focused on completing that environmental documentation and submitting that to permitting agencies that would review this. And once that process is complete, the city can move forward with securing funding to finalizing design and building the project. So in the preliminary design, to provide some perspective, 320th, I-5, 324th, this magenta dash line is the Sound Transit Federal Way Link Extension, and the orange dotted line is the potential routes to eventually to Comodo. And so then existing culverts here are shown in the dark green across the northbound ramps, and then across I-5 and through the park and ride and down into Belmore Park. So let's see, and then these wetlands are shown in light green here, and nice big bog right here. So those culverts are, we're going to be required to provide fish passage improvements to help accommodate migrating fish. And example of what a passable culvert looks like down here on the far right. So essentially, we'd be rerouting the flow to east of the northbound ramp terminals at 320th, and then a new alignment just north of where 324th will go across, going under I-5. This section through the existing park and ride would be open channel, and then another culvert under 324th into Belmore Park. So another thing, originally we were looking at, this is the Weyerhaeuser Way intersection with 324th, and we started off thinking that it would probably be best for this access to the fish access on North Lake to continue into the roundabout, and that has been proving a little bit more problematic than we'd hoped, and so we're looking at modifying that design to just provide access, basically preserve the existing access and slightly modify the design of the roundabout to accommodate that. So that will be dependent on Fish and Wildlife and the Recreation Conservation Office at the state will be requiring their approval. And initially, we were thinking that this would be a 4F de minimis process, and it may still trigger that even with the lesser amount of improvements. So, yeah, anyway, so.
Can I ask a question?
Of course, yes,
Could you
certainly.
explain what you mean by that?
Okay, so property that is acquired for certain recreational purposes, when you're impacting that land, you have to go through a process. It's not basically called 4F, where EPA has decided that you cannot impact those recreational properties without having to go through a very detailed analysis of the environmental impacts and then how to replace or mitigate that. And it's a pretty significant process and usually takes about 1.5 years right now, even to do a de minimis process, which is kind of truncated process. So we're trying to avoid that with this, but it still may trigger it, but the lesser the impacts, the lesser mitigation will be required for that.
So is this a Hylobus that,
It does feed into the Hylobos.
okay.
So looking at potential property impacts, these are in Belmore Park. And again, the orange lines are the potential alignments for the extension of Sound Transit. And these gray areas constitute the majority of the parcels that would be impacted. And so we're looking at 14 displacements here, and then 4 for the culvert improvements. And then there's one additional property down on 24th Avenue South that would be impacted. So, there's a chance that most, if not all of these, depending on the timing, would be impacted by Sound Transit before we got there. But of course, if we do end up having to acquire those properties, we would, as in consideration of state and federal law, we would have to pay fair market value, relocation assistance for those that are displaced. And we will continue to be communicating with those property owners and tenants as we learn more and in advance of the potential impacts. So, public outreach, we kind of like voting in Chicago, early and often. So we started off in August 2021, hosting briefings with community-based organization leadership, Belmore Park leadership, Belmore Park residents, and engaging the Korean, Russian, Spanish, and Vietnamese language communities, low-income populations, seniors, people with disabilities, and transit users. So we consulted with these leadership folks to learn how to best engage the communities they represent and support and serve. And we coordinated those briefings as part of an environmental justice outreach process to ensure that our most impacted community members were well informed about the potential displacements related to this project and how the project would affect the built and natural environments. So we offered briefings in English with live interpretation to ensure language access. As needed, Belmore Park leadership identified Mandarin, Russian, and Spanish language needs amongst the residents, and to meet those needs, we hosted a Belmore Park residential briefing with live interpretation in these 3 languages. And to make sure that these residents were aware of the meeting and available interpretation services, we coordinated with Belmore Park leadership to hand deliver instructions for joining the meeting directly to the families who use Mandarin, Russian, and Spanish at Belmore Park. And the city will continue to update the website and send email updates. So with that, I will turn it over to Desiree to talk about the environmental stuff.
Can I ask a question before we move on?
Of course.
Yeah.
So the people you had the community engagement, especially the low-income population, how did you identify them or find them?
So we went through many of the known Federal Way service organizations. So Multi-Service Center, I know, is one organization that we went through. And I have a big list I can certainly provide to you. We also have public outreach summary that lists all the different organizations that we engaged with. There's actually 2 of them. So one that we did early prior to selecting the preferred alternative, and then another public outreach summary that we did once the preferred alternative was identified. Both of those reports are online on our project website, and that they can be accessed, but I can get you more information. Thank you.
Can I ask one question? How many stalls are going to be taken away from the parking when that open ditch stream goes through?
Over 120, I think, was the last count.
That will disappear?
Yeah, they'll have to be mitigated somehow. So there's a lot going on in that location. We can talk a little bit more about that. It's not just our project either, it's Sound Transit projects as well. So.
Thank you.
And I have a couple of questions also. One is just with in Belmore Park, reaching out to people with other languages, were there takers on that? Did we?
Yes.
Okay, great, super. And also, if Sound Transit beats us to it to take those properties first, are we still going to have to pay a ratio of it, or
No.
Are they taking it and we get a free ride on it?
No, they take them and the impact would be completed at that point.
Okay, all right. And then lastly, you said that several agencies need to approve everything. What are those agencies that need to do the approval?
I'll probably come through some of that, but we are going through both the state environmental process as well as the federal, national environmental process, anticipating that at some point in time, there's going to be a federal nexus on this project. Most likely funding is one of them. The park impacts actually fall into both a state and a federal impact, potentially. So we have, let's say, for the biggest ones, and I'll go over some of them today, we need approval from Department of Archaeological Historic Preservation, which we've gotten that already. We need approval from U.S. Fish and Wildlife. We need approval from National Marine Fisheries. The environmental lead on this is Federal Highways. So they ultimately provide the NEPA approval, but they wait for all the other agencies to weigh in on it. Army Corps for wetland impacts, there's a lot. Yes.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. So let's say that we purchase those properties first in Belmore Park, and then Sound Transit comes through and needs to purchase them from us. Is it a better deal for Sound Transit at that point? Because they don't have to do the relocation or any of that stuff with those folks?
It's complex.
Okay.
It depends on what we ultimately need for our right-of-way, for our roadway improvements. It's as if if they come in first, it's as if they are a developer and they are doing a development project and are going to be required to set aside right-of-way for our roadway project and potentially build some of it as part of their project, if you think about it that way. Yes, if we came in and bought it first, they would need to obtain from us a transit-way agreement over our right-of-way, assuming that we buy it as right-of-way and not like real property, depending on if the property is needed for our storm drainage facilities or not. So based on the timing that we see now and our coordination with Sound Transit, it appears they're going to be here first, but we'll see.
Well, hopefully we can tell the residents that will be losing their housing soon, that they're going to be impacted. Thank you.
Thank you. So, as you've already heard, the project does have potential impacts to the built natural and human environments. Our design team and consultants have been doing many what we call discipline reports for the different environmental disciplines, including environmental justice, biological assessment, cultural resources, noise analysis, wetlands, and hazardous material. And what I'm going to do is kind of give a brief summary of kind of the highlights or lowlights of each of those discipline reports. So for environmental justice, we've already discussed that. The biggest impact is the displacement of the 19 residences, mostly in Belmore Park. And again, as we said, they overlap with the Sound Transit OMF South preferred alternative or TDLE project expansion
So
there.
Desiree, can I ask a question about the 19
Yes.
displacement? So if they have a mobile home, my understanding is that, the mobile home may not be worth anything. If it's over a certain number of years, the mobile home will not be able to be moved or sold in any manner. It'd have to be recycled somehow. And so do we pay, in other words, we could pay them to move, but do we pay for or would Sound Transit pay for the recycling of the mobile home?
That's a lot of details.
Well,
But
I
it's,
just-
it's a fair market value of what it is worth.
That's the
And
point.
we have to work with them to provide them relocation.
Okay,
So,
but I just want to make you aware that there may not be any fair market value. So the real problem with the low-income resident is they would be stuck with trying to get rid of the property, the mobile home, and have to pay $25,000 or $30,000 just to get the moved off the property. So I just want us to be aware that we need to pay for that.
absolutely.
Thank you.
So biological assessment is basically what it sounds like. It considers the effects of protected species, and not just the species themselves, but their habitat. So within the project limits, there's no critical habitat at this point or species, so no direct effects on them. However, the big issue is the contaminants from stormwater runoff that we have to address. And it'll be discharged to streams that ultimately go downstream to where there are protected species. So we propose to mitigate this stormwater treatment strategies to minimize and almost improve the impacts that are currently there today. And then also, as we showed you before, the fish passage improvements where we're replacing the culverts will open up ultimately, when the downstream impacts are fixed, more area for them to access. So the wetland report, we worked very hard to avoid wetland impacts, but there is potential impact, a permanent impact to about 1 acre of wetland throughout the whole project limits. There is about there's 3.6 acres of temporary impacts during construction. Minimal impacts to streams and no impacts to the bog southeast of South 320th Street. So we are looking at options to mitigate those wetland impacts. There's ability to potentially go downstream and enhance other wetlands and within the High Labos watershed. There's also, King County does have programs you can buy into wetland mitigation. So definitely something we can and will mitigate. So a hazardous material report, we have to go and look at areas where there's potential for hazardous materials. There were 21 low-risk hazardous material sites, 2 medium-risk sites, 0 high-risk. There was no long-term impacts associated with this particular project. The potential impacts is basically it's dirty dirt. And so it impacts mostly the people that are constructing the project. So there will be provisions within the contract to address any issues coming across this hazardous material. So cultural resources study, it looks at the preservation of areas of cultural significance, including archaeological sites, historic buildings, roads and bridges, and other places of historical significance. So we have to work with the Washington State Department of Archaeological and Historic Preservation and determine what the area of potential effect is for the project. So it's not just the footprint of the project, but also like 500 feet away as far as the visual impacts are concerned. So field studies were conducted and concluded this last December. We have consulted with both Department of Archaeological and Historic Preservation and the tribes starting in January 2023. They go out there, they do shovel probes, everything. So the Department of Archaeological Historic Preservation provided us a letter of concurrence that there are no adverse effects. And then we have, as far as the tribes are concerned, we have heard from one tribe to date with no substantive comments, and we are waiting to hear from the remaining tribes if there are any concerns. but thus far, we don't anticipate anything for cultural resource impacts. So a noise analysis was conducted. It considers the effects of the people that are living and working nearby, both during construction and during the ultimate configuration of road widening, all of that. So there are some impacts on the north segment near 320th. That is actually being taken care of right now with Federal Way Link Extension and their noise walls. So we found that is going to work out. The east segment, which is along 320th, like near South King Fire and Rescue, that will require some amount of noise walls for the south side receptors, the apartments over there. And then the southwest segment, which is primarily along Belmore Park, will also need to be mitigated with noise walls. So that will be fleshed out more during design. Then as far as next steps, we hit a good milestone. We have received some state funding in the last legislative cycle to move forward with the design and right-of-way acquisition for phase one. And I have another slide that'll kind of show you our proposal for what phase one of the construction would look like. So we have to do something which is get into the state transportation improvement plan in order to be eligible to get our money for that. And as of March 14th, our project is in the state transportation improvement plan. So that's a big milestone. There's going to be a long time for permitting process, mostly because of the biological assessment, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and the National Marine Fisheries, and having to consult with them. That is upward of about a year and a half is what it's been. So that will take quite some time. We propose also to we're going to do more continued public outreach. So all the reports and the summaries I talked about, we're going to make available on the project website so anybody can download them, review them, understand what the impacts are. So we hope to start final design as soon as 2024 and construction potentially as soon as 2026 or 2027. It really depends on how quickly we can move forward. So I talked a little bit about the funding we received from the state legislature for both the design and the right-of-way acquisition for phase one. What we are proposing is that phase one would be the extension of 324th to the southbound ramps, so that there'll be a southbound on-ramp and a southbound off-ramp that comes off of 320th. And then improvements at Pack Highway and 324th in order to accommodate that. That's what we kind of propose as the phase one construction of this project. We'll continue to move forward to try to get additional funds. And with that, ask Rick questions. And that is my summary.
All right,
If you have any
Mayor.
questions.
Thank you. How many lanes will 324th be?
324th will be five lanes mostly, and then at the intersections, there'll be additional turn lanes.
Okay.
Okay, Councilmember Seffa Dawson?
Yeah. Just now, when you asked us to go on your website because the documents are there, I came across Title VI. And on there, it talks about encourages what does Title VI do? It says encourages the participation of minorities as members of planning or advisory bodies for programs receiving federal funds. Can you tell me that, and if we're doing that, how we're doing it, please?
Absolutely.
I think goes back to my initial question also.
Right, and again, we have worked with many different community organizations to make sure that they are engaged and understand the projects and the project impacts. So I know, to name a few, El Centro de la Raza, we have been to Korean Quarterly meeting pretty regularly. Again, Multi-Service Center, we've had outreach meetings with them. And then as far as I think just most detailed involvement because of the impacts directly to Belmore Park is really working with that community leadership and understanding the makeup of their community and understanding that they have native Spanish-speaking residents, and we weren't aware, but Mandarin is not a normal language that we would do interpretation or translation services in. But because that's something that they needed, we found that out to determine that's what they needed. There's a Russian community there as well. So, and we will continue to do that outreach. And I was working with our diversity, equity, inclusion coordinator on making sure that the information is getting out in the best way to do so with those community groups.
Okay, but here it says wait, where did I see it? As members of planning or advisory bodies. So the community outreach is not, to me, it doesn't sound like it's an advisory body or bodies, so is that something we need to?
Yeah, we don't have an advisory body for this specific project.
We're okay.
So we have made more efforts to go out to the communities as a whole,
Right.
and then as well as this very specific impacted communities, so.
So do you think we're okay as we're going after federal funds?
Absolutely. In fact, we provided our public outreach plan in our Title VI report last year, and were given quite good compliments on the amount of effort we have made to reach out to the specific communities.
All right, any other questions? Comments? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, without any further questions or comments, that concludes the special meeting of the Federal Way City Council. We'll reconvene at 6:30.